Upon hearing the phoenix's words, Xiao's expression shifted in shock. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Was that figure truly returning? The phoenix didn't hesitate. With a proud and powerful tone, it confirmed Xiao's suspicions. The statue had been broken, its power awakened once more, and soon it would shatter the last of its restraints. And before that moment arrived, that man, without a doubt, would return. As Xiao processed this, he clutched the chain in his hand and questioned the phoenix directly. If this creature had the power to break divine shackles, then why had it been imprisoned here in the first place? The phoenix responded almost immediately, flustered and furious. It shouted about a vile conspiracy, an ambush carried out by Heestus, a false god. The attack had come at the worst possible moment, when the phoenix was weak and vulnerable after laying its offspring. That last word caught Xiao's attention. Offspring? Did that mean a phoenix chick existed somewhere? With a surge of hope, he raised his hand confidently, declaring his intent to save the child. But the phoenix, filled with pride and disdain, scoffed at him. It reminded Xiao of his status, calling him a mere human and insisting that no one of his kind could ever tame a creature bearing such a noble bloodline. Unfazed by the insult, Xiao stood his ground. He wasn't here for games or meaningless chatter. Above him, a massive presence made itself known. A dragon appeared in an instant, and Xiao called out to it with purpose. He urged the beast, Ashi, to show the phoenix what it could do. Ashi soared toward the phoenix, and the moment it came into view, the majestic bird recoiled in disbelief. It was stunned. A dragon of such caliber under the control of a human? That was simply beyond comprehension. Sweat rolled down the phoenix's face as it struggled to accept what it was seeing. The idea that the dragon god, an ancient, revered being, would grant his blessing to a human seemed utterly absurd. But Xiao didn't flinch. He summoned his divine artifact without hesitation, eyes locked on the phoenix, demanding once more to know where its offspring was hidden. Seeing Xiao's resolve and the divine power at his disposal, the phoenix finally relented. It seemed to accept that this moment was perhaps dictated by fate itself. With a heavy but calm voice, it told Xiao to go and find the chick. Then, as if guided by destiny, it released one of its feathers, letting it float gently toward Xiao. Catching the feather, Xiao's eyes lit up with excitement. The thought that another mythical rank pet was within his reach had him grinning wide. But just then, the red toad nearby snapped him back to reality with a warning. This wouldn't be easy. Xiao wasn't just stepping into danger. He was walking into a literal sea of fire. Looking ahead, Xiao caught sight of the blazing terrain. Panic flashed across his face for a moment as he realized it wasn't just fire, it was magma. Still, determination returned almost instantly. A mythical ranked pet was worth any risk. Even if it meant diving straight into a pool of flames, he was all in. Gripping the feather tightly in front of him, Xiao began his walk into the fire. Beads of sweat poured from his face as the heat intensified. Thankfully, the Fire Spirit King crystal he possessed granted him a 95% resistance to fire. Without it, he admitted to himself, he'd be roasted like a pig by now. He pressed forward, pushing through the searing heat. But he couldn't take it much longer. He called out, desperate to reach the end of this blazing trial before he collapsed. As he moved further in, the feather in his hand began reacting more violently. He knew then he was getting close. With each step, the aura grew stronger. Then finally, just ahead, something caught his eye. There was a large yellow egg, glowing faintly amidst the magma. Xiao's breath caught in his throat as realization dawned. It wasn't just any egg. It was a phoenix egg, and he had finally found it. With a large yellow egg now in front of him, Xiao reached out and tried to lift it with both hands. A grin spread across his face as excitement welled up inside him. He couldn't help but chuckle to himself. This was a big deal. Still holding the egg, he called out to Old Hull, half-jokingly asking if he knew how to hatch something like this. Then, with a laugh, Xiao teased that maybe he'd just turn it into a fried egg if all else failed. But before he could enjoy the moment, another sudden flash of light burst behind him. A voice pierced through the air, demanding to know who was there. One of the light beams struck Xiao directly, making him cry out in pain as the force surged through him. Still reeling, he clenched his teeth and shouted back furiously, vowing that his business with the fire god was far from over. But before he could gather himself, a blazing hand of fire suddenly materialized in front of him, and the red frog on his shoulder panicked. Urging him to run, the frog's voice was tight with fear. Without hesitation, Xiao took off, dodging as the fire hand lashed out again. He sprinted through the flames, shouting as he ran. Meanwhile, the red frog, still clinging to his shoulder, muttered in exasperation, wondering aloud why Xiao always ended up in deadly places just to steal eggs. Finally, Xiao managed to return to where he had started, egg still firmly in hand. He let out a deep breath of relief, gasping for air. Seeing him actually make it back, the phoenix was stunned. It couldn't believe Xiao had survived the lava and returned in one piece. Xiao, still trying to catch his breath, didn't respond right away. He stood there, chest heaving. The phoenix's expression had changed. It now looked at Xiao with fierce respect. It was hard to believe a mere level 40 mortal had managed to survive the terrifying lava and return holding the phoenix egg. Eventually, Xiao gave a casual reply, brushing off the feet as if it were nothing. Egg stealing? That was child's play to him. It wasn't even his first time. But before the phoenix could respond, another beam of divine light descended from the sky and struck the ground in front of Xiao. A booming voice filled the air, filled with fury and disdain. The divine figure accused Xiao of destroying a sacred statue and touching the forbidden egg, crimes that couldn't be forgiven. It declared that it would personally tear Xiao apart and make him suffer the wrath of a god. Hearing that declaration, the phoenix turned urgently to Xiao. There was no more time. Heestus was almost upon them, and once he arrived, there would be no escape. The phoenix pleaded with Xiao to leave immediately. He was to take the phoenix's offspring and run as far as he could. When the chick had grown strong enough, he was to return and make those responsible for all of this pay. Sweating from both heat and tension, Xiao's thoughts raced. Sister Tao wasn't here to back him up. If the fire god showed up, even with his money shield, the cost of surviving would be astronomical. In a quiet voice, almost to himself, Xiao asked the phoenix if there was truly no way to help it break the seal that kept it bound. The phoenix paused, then admitted there was a way, but Xiao was far too weak. Even the strongest of humanity might not be capable of doing what was required. But Xiao wasn't discouraged. Reaching into his pocket with confidence, he encouraged the phoenix to share the details. What if he did have a way? The phoenix finally gestured toward two faint, black aura-filled markings nearby. They shimmered with power and mystery. It explained that these two marks were divine seals. The only way to undo them was to break them at the exact same time. Xiao responded without hesitation, remarking that it didn't sound too difficult. But the phoenix immediately shot down that idea. A mortal had no power to open divine seals. Still calm and collected, Xiao raised his divine artifact, the horn-shaped relic he carried, and asked whether it would be possible with this. The phoenix's eyes widened as it recognized the artifact immediately. It was the horn of the destruction god. The phoenix was stunned that Xiao actually possessed such a powerful divine item. But even with it, the phoenix warned him it still wouldn't be enough. To break both seals simultaneously, two divine artifacts were required. As soon as Xiao heard that he would need two divine artifacts, he responded without hesitation. He didn't have another artifact, but he wasn't ready to give up. Thinking quickly, he pulled out a glowing stone with a calm, confident expression. What he did have was a cooldown stone. With it, he could activate the power of the destruction god not once, but twice in a row. The phoenix stared at him in disbelief. It couldn't understand how a mortal like him kept pulling out such rare and strange treasures one after another. Each item he revealed seemed more extraordinary than the last. But before they could continue, the air grew tense, thick with divine pressure. A booming, arrogant voice echoed from the heavens, mocking Xiao. It was Heestus, the god of fire, who had finally descended. His tone was dripping with scorn as he proclaimed that Xiao should feel honored. To be torn apart by his divine hand would be the greatest moment of any mortal's life. He declared that both Xiao's divine energy and the beast beside him were destined to become his nourishment. Xiao looked up at the sky, determination replacing fear. There was no turning back. He clenched his fists and muttered to himself, if he didn't act now, there'd be no stopping this old geezer from succeeding. Without waiting another second, Xiao launched himself toward the ancient seal, landing before the ancient mark glowing with black aura. He raised his artifact and focused his energy. His eyes were full of resolve. Then, with a powerful swing, he shouted out for the divine energy to taste the might of the horn of the destruction god, slamming it directly into the mark. But he wasn't done yet. He immediately brought out the cool-down stone, using it to activate the artifact once more. With another swing, he struck the seal again. A powerful rumble followed. The black aura that had once marked the seal began to vanish, its presence breaking apart under the dual blasts of divine power. Xiao stood tall and proud, defiant as ever. He shouted into the chaos with fiery confidence, proclaiming that he didn't care what kind of god he was facing. It was time to shatter. The phoenix, watching from behind, was wide-eyed with shock. This mortal had actually succeeded in breaking the seal. But just as things seemed to be turning, an enormous shadow loomed behind Xiao. A towering figure with a massive hammer stepped forward, none other than Heestus himself. He stared down at Xiao, his voice thunderous as he ordered the human to surrender his life. Xiao looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. The sheer size of the god stunned him. He couldn't stop himself from muttering in disbelief. This guy was way too big. Heestus continued, speaking with arrogant confidence. He proclaimed that the mighty god of fire had arrived, and Xiao should kneel in submission. But before Heestus could make another move, the air around them shifted. The chains that had bound the phoenix shattered, freed by Xiao's destruction of the divine seal. The majestic creature rose into the sky and flew directly in front of the fire god, cutting him off. Facing Heestus head-on, the phoenix shouted with a fierce, righteous fury. It declared that the false god had come at the perfect time. Heestus staggered in shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The seal was supposed to be unbreakable. How could the phoenix possibly be free? But the phoenix didn't give him time to process. It stared the god down with blazing eyes, filled with wrath and pain. The time had come to make him pay for his sins. This was no longer just a battle. This was justice. The phoenix spread her wings wide, and in a sudden burst, a radiant golden light erupted from her body, flooding the sky with divine brilliance. Xiao, now hiding behind a crumbling stone pillar, peeked out just long enough to catch the intensity of the clash. His eyes widened as he watched the divine powers collide. Cold sweat ran down his face. This fight wasn't one he had any business being part of. Without hesitation, he turned to Old Hull and whispered urgently. This was way above their pay grade. They needed to hide. Now, despite the phoenix's fearsome presence, the god didn't back down. He raised his massive hammer high into the air and stared the phoenix down with cold arrogance. His voice thundered as he reminded her that she had been sealed away for years, her origin drained. He doubted she had much power left in her, but the phoenix wasn't fazed. With her wings spread and flames surging, she charged straight at him, shouting that he'd pay in blood for his despicable crimes. As Heestus swung his hammer down in a devastating blow, the phoenix swiftly dodged it. The attack missed her, but the impact alone was enough to send Xiao flying backward through the air. Spinning uncontrollably, Xiao yelled out in shock. The sheer force had overwhelmed him. This god's strength was on another level. Still, he managed to steady himself mid-air. With a deep breath, he quickly activated his money shield, desperate to protect himself from another blow. Meanwhile, the phoenix launched her own attack. Her strike landed squarely against the god's arm. The moment her flames clashed with his hammer, it shattered instantly. Heestus stumbled back, wide-eyed, stunned to see his weapon destroyed. Without giving him a moment to recover, the phoenix lunged forward again, declaring that she'd let him feel what it was like to be melted alive. Heestus growled in fury. He called her a traitor, accusing her of defying a god's will. But the phoenix wasn't backing down. With flames raging around her and her eyes burning with wrath, She roared that he didn't deserve the title of God. In her eyes, he was unworthy of such power. Then came the final strike. With one swift, blinding attack, she pierced through him. The god let out a pained scream as his body was torn apart in midair. As he collapsed to the ground, broken and defeated, his last words were filled with disbelief. He couldn't accept what had just happened. Xiao, still hiding behind a pillar and watching the entire battle unfold, was drenched in sweat. His voice trembled with shock and awe. Was the phoenix really this terrifying? She had just ripped apart the fire god like it was nothing. Even the red toad perched on his shoulder was in full panic mode. He reminded Xiao, nervously, that they had just stolen this phoenix's offspring. Wouldn't she be furious enough to snap him in half too? Hovering above the lifeless body of Heestus, the phoenix spread her wings wide. Her voice echoed with divine energy. With the blood of God, she would now be reborn from the flames. Xiao, still shaken, gently placed the egg on the ground. He raised both hands, slowly and nervously addressed the phoenix. He tried to explain that this was all a misunderstanding and that he was perfectly willing to return the egg. The phoenix turned to him, confused at first. A misunderstanding? What was he talking about? She laughed softly and told him that he had nothing to worry about. Instead of anger, she owed him thanks. Then, without warning, she extended her hand and handed Xiao 2 glowing drops of divine blood. He stared at the droplets in amazement. What was this? As he took them into his hands and examined them closely, a system notification materialized in front of him. Blood of a divine spirit. Grade, unknown. Description: the powerful god of craftsmanship and fire, Heestus, has existed on the lost continent for tens of thousands of years. His blood flows with divinity. But who could possibly obtain the blood of a god? Xiao's hands trembled slightly as he held the divine liquid. His eyes gleamed with excitement. The blood of a god? A huge grin spread across his face. Laughing to himself, he turned to the red toad and cracked a joke, showing absolutely no shame about keeping the treasure. The toad, looking thoroughly annoyed, snapped back at him, saying he really was shameless. But the phoenix quickly brought the focus back. She explained that the divine blood wasn't just a reward, it was necessary. It would help Xiao hatch her offspring. Xiao pointed at himself in surprise. Wait, he was supposed to hatch the egg? The phoenix nodded firmly. Her chick had yet to emerge from its shell, and now it was up to Xiao to find a way to bring it into the world.